Our next speaker is Neerav Parekh. Neerav Parekh is the founder and CEO of Bephrase, a natural language generation company. Neerav has more than 15 years of experience in working in different roles and setting up businesses in technology, marketing, and finance. After completing the MBA from NMIMS, Neerav worked at Citibank and then co-founded startups in the technology and marketing space before founding Bephrase. Neerav has received the prestigious Leader in Innovation Fellowship from the Royal Academy of Engineering, United Kingdom. He is a thought leader in the areas of business intelligence and data science. He is an advisor to institutes teaching data science and regularly speaks at events including those by the Government of India, CII, NASSCOM, ASSOCHAM, and more. Natural language generation, NLG, is one of the key applications of AI technology in content. Neerav shall talk about robot journalism. Welcome, Neerav.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and a fantastic introduction, Manju. It is my pleasure to be here along with such esteemed dignitaries. I was hearing the talks earlier by Jonathan and by Gilmore. I think it was fantastic. And they spoke about how journalists need to get into investigative journalism. They need to do data-driven journalism. But I guess the situation today is that there are so many routine stories which the journalists are supposed to do that it leaves them with very little time to actually get into more interesting, more challenging, more meaningful kind of journalism, right? So what I'll do is I'll quickly share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to take you through the application of artificial intelligence in the newsroom. So there are plenty of things for which AI is being used in journalism, in newsroom. And over the last 3 days, I think all the speakers have talked about how artificial intelligence can be used to improve the quality of journalism that is happening. What I'm going to focus on is not on those interesting and challenging things. I'm going to focus on the routine things which the journalists have to do and how AI can help us automate those routine things so that everyone is free to do more interesting and challenging work. So I have put across an earnings story on the screen. Now, if you read through this earnings story and try to figure out what exactly is special in this, I'll give you a minute to do that. So it reads like a typical earnings story which is written, right? It talks about the stats, how things are moved, whether profitability is increased or not, and a lot of other things. Now, this seems like a normal earnings story which we typically read in newspapers. The only difference is that this news story is written by a robot using the data that you see on the screen. Now, robots have started writing a lot of stories. And we are not talking about stories being written in labs for demo purpose. Robots are writing stories which you and I are reading in newspapers, on websites, on portals. These are stories in production. We're not talking about experiments and demos and things in labs. It is actually in production. So robots have started writing a lot of stories. So earning stories is something that I just showed. They're writing stories on weather. They're writing stories on the stock markets, crime reports, sports reporting as well. A lot of stories are being written on sports, cricket especially, and then talk about real estate price trends in a lot of different aspects. So one common thing that you'll see on all the stories that are being written in production right now is that all these stories have data at their base, as their base. So these are all data-driven stories. And how are these robots writing these stories? The technology which is being used is called natural language generation. This is a technology where machines use non-linguistic input So any input which is in form of data uh, is taken as input, and it writes language basis that. So essentially what the machines do is they analyze the data, draw out the insights, build a story around those insights, and then write that story using normal language. So this is how robots write language. And how well can these robots write? So an analysis was done and a research was done where the stories written by human journalists and those written by robots were evaluated on 12 descriptors of quality and credibility. And what was found was that stories which were written by humans were very well written, coherent, and pleasant to read, whereas those written by the robots were informative, accurate, trustworthy, and objective. So you see, by default, the kind of coherence and the kind of quality of writing that human journalists can do is difficult to match for by the robots for now. But the way they write and what they write essentially is much more trustworthy, much more accurate and objective as compared to human writing. There was another study which was done where articles written by both journalists and robots were mixed up, and people were asked to identify which article is written by whom. So as you'll see, the article which was actually written by software, 10 people identified it as being written by a human journalist. And likewise, when an article was written by a journalist, actually 10 people again identified it as written by software. So what it tells us is it's very difficult to accurately identify who has written the article, whether it was written by a human or by a software. So can these robots replace journalists? I know this is a very sensitive topic, and I'm sure that most of people in the audience are somewhere scared about the whole thing. But I think there is no point running away from this discussion. I think this is something that we should put it right in the center of the table and discuss about it. Robots definitely are automating a lot of work that human journalists are currently doing. And why are the publishers preferring robots? Because one, they're more accurate. Obviously, because they're machines, they don't tend to make mistakes which a human would typically make, right? They're accurate, they're fast, they conform to standards, and then they can operate at an enormous scale. So robots can essentially free up the journalists from doing all the routine stories, and they can then focus on more challenging kind of work. Like I said right at the start, everyone wants to do stories which are investigative, which are data driven, which are challenging. Nobody wants to write routine stories like earnings analysis, weather reports, and those kind of reports. So I think robots are best suited for automating all that kind of work, all those kind of stories. But what robots cannot do, certainly, is that they cannot write non-routine stories. So think about it. If we talk about any event, suppose the prime minister visited a border area and spent time with troops, there's no way a robot can write a story on that. And likewise, if you think what differentiates us as humans from these robots, and where robots would find it really difficult to match up to us as humans, is in creativity angle. So humans by default are creative, and we can think of a lot of different creative things that we can write about. But if you look at robots, for them, it is very objective, methodical way of doing things. They always lack creativity. So anything and everything that requires creativity, I think humans will always be better than what the robots can offer. So I think what we as journalists, human journalists, should focus on is focus on our strengths and do the kind of work that typically robots would find difficult to do. Focus our energies, focus our training, focus our experience on those kind of fields, and not limit ourselves to doing routine kind of work, which eventually would get automated by robots. And artificial intelligence is not just automating the stories. It is also helping the news publishers in other aspects as well. Uh, Biggest benefit of robo journalism, if you think about it, when we look at the amount of content which is which needs to be produced in this digital world, I think personalization at scale is huge. Robots are able to write stories at a scale that we humans can never imagine. They can publish thousands of stories within seconds. And these stories can be personalized in real time, depending on the persona of the reader. So that gives a strong, very strong benefit to publishers, because content is being published in tons, and it's difficult for humans to match up, to write these stories from different angles. The same story from different angles for different personas is difficult, but with robots you can do that. And you think of native advertising, I think robots with the strength of personalization can do wonders on the native advertising field. So I was telling you about automation of stories, but artificial intelligence can also certainly help news publishers in different things. So one common problem that all news publishers have to deal with, like any organization, is to deal with the tons of data. So if you are into TV viewership, TV channels, then they have to deal with a lot of data which comes in from BARC and other ratings agencies. And then if you are in news publication, again, you have data coming in from market research organizations, plus you have data coming in from the website. So there's a lot of traffic data which comes in. And organizations which are able to analyze and synthesize this data quickly are able to take decisions which are in real time, and are able to get them better ROI. So organizations which are not using intelligence, are not using the real current age tools, they tend to spend a lot of time in creating reports. They spend days in creating reports, and by the time they take decisions basis of reports, that data is already outdated. So AI is helping in that as well. So what you see on the screen is a viewership report on English movies category. Now, tools using AI are able to create the report. So the report that you're seeing on the left is actually machine written report. So it is analyzing all the data of the TV shows that were run, the movies that were run over the last week, over the historical period, which movies did well, which did not, what time slots were working well, what was the trend like, is the viewership increasing, is the viewership decreasing. This kind of data keeps coming on a daily, on a weekly basis, and analyzing all this data to quickly understand what is performing and what is not performing is critical. And tools with their intelligence are able to help the teams write this kind of reports in real time, so that they're able to make the decisions faster. Likewise, intelligence is also helping, AI is also helping in competitive analysis, checking how are the competitors doing, which of the programs are doing well, which are not doing well, which ones are growing, which ones are going down, how are your own programs performing against their programs. All this kind of intelligence, all this data is always available. It is about how much of this data can you use, and how soon can you use this to help you make the right decisions. Then obviously the revenue stream, right? The revenue comes from ads. Subscription is going down significantly. Ads is where people are making the revenue. And ensuring that your sales team has the right kind of data to go and talk to the advertisers, knowing which advertisers are increasing spends with you, which advertisers are decreasing spends with you and increasing their spends with some competitor. All that data is available in the market. It is about using that data and creating reports for your sales teams, so that they are able to create, they are able to generate the right kind of advertising revenue for you. So, like you see, artificial intelligence is not just useful in automating stories, but it is also useful in making sense of data for the organization, so that they can perform better. So energy and AI are revolutionizing traditional journalism, and they're doing it well. There are organizations which are already using this across the board, both in India and outside. We ourselves are also working with a few publishers. I'm done with the presentation, but I'll quickly close with some bit about us as a company. So I am a founder of VPhrase. We built an AI robo journalist called Fraser. Fraser writes data-driven news stories and leadership reports in seconds. You can have a look at it and read more about it at fraser.ai. So I'll show you a few examples of the articles that Fraser writes. So there are a couple of articles on the screen: earnings analysis, on Infosys. This is actually live on websites, publisher websites, written by Fraser, Bullion Prices coverage. Then two other articles. So we just had Bihar elections happen. So the content on Bihar elections was automated using Fraser. And Fraser also wrote live commentary on IPL matches that were happening. So these are all articles which are in production, which are live on the websites of these publishers. So we're not talking about, like I said, we're not talking about experiments in labs. These are all things in production. So robos have already started writing content for news publishers. So these are some examples of articles, the reports that I showed earlier. This report, this report, this report. All these reports are also written by Fraser for our clients. So robo journalists are already in the market. They're already writing stories, and like I said, we as human journalists will need to make peace with that, and we'll need to focus on our strengths and work in areas where we think that robots would find it difficult to match. But for all the routine work, I think journalists themselves should start using such tools. So if I was a journalist and if my manager asked me to write stories on earnings analysis, I would look at a tool like Fraser and I'll automate that work. And I ask my manager to give me some more investigative kind of work. So that is how I would look at it, rather than fighting robo journalists and trying to say, no, these robots are not writing well and I can write better. I think the economics of the whole thing would not make it a good case to fight. The cost that these robots will come at, the speed with which they can write, and the amount of content that they can write is humanly impossible to match. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions, whatever are available. Thank you.
Sorry for the delay. Thank you, Neerav, for the great insights. And my colleague, Ninu PK, shall moderate the question and answer session.
Sure.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
I'm Neenu, and I'll be moderating our question and answer session. So, shall we begin the session?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, the first question is, sir, what all qualities should a journalist have when he or she is in this particular career? And please share your experience when you entered into this career.
So I'll answer the second part first. I am not a journalist. I'm a business person. I built a technology that is able to automate some of the work that journalists do. So by default, I have no background in publishing. I'm from a software background. I'm from a IT background. Now, the first part of the question, I think, was what qualities should upcoming journalists focus on, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, like I said throughout during the presentation, that the upcoming journalists or any journalist should not focus on challenging the robots or fighting with the robots in terms of uh, competing with them and saying the content that I write is better, or I can do this better or faster, whatever. It's not going to work. They should focus on things that the robots cannot do. And the earlier two speakers talked about so many things, right? So I would rather focus on those areas. I would rather focus on investigative kind of journalism. Use these tools, use the technology to augment the work that you're doing, rather than competing with it. So that is how I would look at the whole thing. I would try to not look at routine kind of work, routine kind of stories, and think that I would be able to build a career with that. I would work on the more challenging kind of journalism work.
Thank you, sir. Now we will move on to the next question of our session. This is our next question. AI is lacking in creativity, as you said. How far it affects the effectiveness in journalism?
I think it does to a large extent, but for a certain kind of stories, right? So, like I said, there are a lot of routine stories. You don't need creativity for those kind of stories. So there it doesn't affect at all. But all the other kind of stories, except for the ones that I talked about, those kind of stories where there's a huge amount of context, there's a huge amount of subjective factors, so huge number of subjective factors which are at play, I think a machine or an algorithm will never be able to match that. And how you put the whole story around, how you build that story, so whole storytelling aspect in itself requires a lot of creativity, right? An average storyteller versus a good storyteller. We in India watch so many movies, right? Now, so why is it that some movies are super hit and while some movies don't work so well? And one common factor that you'll see is that although stars in the movies make a difference, but if you have a strong storyline, even average stars tend to give you super hits, right? So story is the most important thing. That is what everyone wants, and the way we as humans can view stories, I think, is difficult to match for robots purely because it requires a lot of creativity.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to the third question. Automation is a necessary evil considering the information overload and the frantic pace at which news is disseminated. How do you think this will shape up the journalism sphere?
So I totally agree that it's a necessary evil. I think everyone, you're already seeing that news publications are struggling to earn the revenue the way they used to earn before the whole, before the whole industry went online, right? Before the tastes of people changed. When it was like a physical newspaper which was being delivered, physical magazines which were being delivered, you would make money through subscription revenue. But now with everything available online, and with the way the consumers are spoiled for choices, and the way generally just look at our own phones, right? How many of the apps that you use are actually paid apps? All of us use majority of the apps on our phone are free apps. And likewise, we just got, like I said, we are spoiled as consumers. We got used to everything for free, and we are expecting even the news content to come to us for free, but there's actual effort which is required to generate that kind of content. So in such a scenario, obviously the publishers and the news organizations would try to cut down their costs because they don't have the kind of revenues that they used to have earlier. And when they want to cut down the cost, the first thing that try to do is to automate the content that is being created so that they can create more content at lesser cost. So that is what they'll try to do first. And because of that, obviously automation is going to come in, and you can't do much over there. So I would just repeat the same thing. What can you do in this evolving sphere as a journalist is to ensure that you are focusing on strengths of a human and building on those strengths and not trying to get into routine basic kind of work. I think that is all I can say on that.
Thank you for answering. Now we will move on to the next question. This is our next question. How can natural language generation help in creating stories in multiple languages in a country like India?
So I think automation certainly, this is one of the strengths of machines. So again, we are our tool Fraser. It's also able to write in multiple languages. It already writes in 4 different languages. So see, that is the beauty of it, right? Once you build the libraries, then it will just keep on churning out content. And because India has so many different languages, again, having independent writers in those languages and expecting them to translate all the content in those languages is a huge ask. It's an expensive ask. But with machines, it can definitely do that. So we already have clients for whom we write in multiple languages because they have audiences in different parts of India. They have customers in different parts of India. So they want communication to be in multiple languages. And we automate that communication for them. So in fact, it's easier with technology than it is otherwise. It's less expensive with technology than it is otherwise.
Thank you, sir. Shall we move on to the next question? Thank you. This is our next question. Sir, what skills or competencies should one acquire to get into AI journalism sector?
I think obviously everything that you as a journalist learn is important, but at the same time, I heard one of the speakers talk about it that you should not run away from technology. You should not think that no, I have never worked on any software programs. I've never worked on technology. It's a black box for me. No, I want to keep away from it. The more you run away from it, the more it will affect you in a negative way. I think you should make peace with it. If even if till date you not worked with technology and you always kept away from it, there's no harm in starting today. Try to understand how it works. Try to understand how tools work. How do they work? There's no rocket science there. We're not flying rockets over here, right? So there's no rocket science there. It is, the more comfortable you become with those technologies, the easier it would be for you to work with them and to take advantage of them. See, like I said, it's not that these tools can be used by organizations at an organization level alone. You can use them at a personal level as well. If you have a X number of stories that you need to write, use the tools to automate those stories and write more stories so that you can earn more for your content. So there's nothing stopping you. I think as in this world, I think you cannot keep away from technology. You will have to embrace technology. Even if you not learned it so far, try to learn the technology now. Try to use those tools. Try to understand those tools, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of people who will be willing to help you out if you want to embrace the technology. I'm 100% sure.
Thank you, sir. We will move on to the next question.
So, before we move on to the next question, in fact, I was speaking with Manju about this. So, we at Rephrase, she asked if we can conduct some workshops. So, we are happy to conduct workshops where we can actually demonstrate how to use Fraser and how to use technology to automate work. So, we can conduct those sessions for journalists if everyone is okay. So, we are happy to do that.
Thank you, sir. That was really kind of you, and we will let you know where the stakes. So,
Sure.
Manju ma'am will contact you about that. So now, can we move on to the next question?
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. This is our next question. What are the 3 biggest limitations of Fraser?
I think the limitations remain the same, like I said about any AI technology. So it obviously lacks creativity. It Fraser specifically will be able to cover everything that the data covers. So if there is anything which is outside of data, it will not know. So if you're writing a story and if you're providing some data to write that story, then it will be able to write a very good story on that data. But if there are any elements that you want to include in that story beyond that data, it will not be able to include those elements. So I think these 2 limitations, one is the lack of creativity and the other one is it is restricted to what the data includes. If things are not included in data, then it will not be able to comment on.
Okay, sir. Now we will move on to the last question of the session. This is our last question. Can AI reduce bias in news content? What if someone programmed it to be biased? That will be not at all different from the situation we are in right now. Can we reduce that in some way? This question is by Ram Gopal.
I think, see, again, this is a fairly open topic right now. It's a big debate which is happening right now in the world. I think these algorithms will actually increase the impact of bias. See, algorithms are what? They are software programs, right? And these are created by someone. So, in fact, any algorithm, if a very, very basic way of looking at it is just an opinion of its creator. So, an algorithm will be as biased as the creator wants it to be. And it can pick up bias from pre-written content. So because see, most of these algorithms are trained on content which is already present in the world, and you know all the kind of biases which exist in our current world, right? So if the algorithms are trained on biased content, then what they'll learn is also bias, and what they'll reproduce is also bias. So I think it is, and because they are algorithms, they are machines, they're going to produce so much of content. I think it is just going to increase the overall impact and the problem of bias and the biased content and echo chambers and all. It's just going to increase manifold.
Thank you so much. And with that, we come to the end of our question and answer session. It was really nice talking to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer all the questions from the participants.
Thank you so much for having me here, giving this talk. I'm so happy to be in this august company of the kind of speakers that you invited. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure, sir. Now I'll hand over the session to Manju ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Neerav. As you said, we will plan workshop. Okay. And it is great to know how natural language generation is working best in creating content. And newsrooms shall benefit by adopting NLG for doing the mundane repetitive tasks, while journalists can focus on core issues which require human intelligence. Thank you for the great informative session. We look forward to having you for specialized training session for media students and journalists. Thank you, Neerav, for your valuable time.
Thank you so much.